Good evening. Let's read some more. Need some cola. It's 10 p.m. in 20 minutes. So it's a little bit too late to read. But let's read one more. I'll never get finished. Yes, I need a minute.
Fat Man. This is a good article. Click here for more information. Page semi-protected. Fat Man replica of the original Fat Man bomb-type nuclear weapon, place of origin United States, production history designer Los Alamos Laboratory, produced 1945-1949, no build 120, specifications mass 10,300 pounds. 4,670 kilograms, length 128 inches, 3.3 m, diameter 60 inches, 1.5 m, filling plutonium filling, weight 6.4 kilogram, blast yield 21 kt, 88 tj. Fat Man, also known as Mark III, was the code name for the type of nuclear weapon the United States detonated over the Japanese city of Nagasaki on the 9th of August, 1945. It was the second of only two nuclear weapons ever used in warfare, the first being Little Boy, and its detonation marked the third nuclear explosion in history. It was built by scientists and engineers at Los Alamos Laboratory using plutonium from the Hanford site, and was dropped from the Boeing B-29 Superfortress Bockscar piloted by Major Charles Sweeney. The name Fat Man refers to the early design of the bomb because it had a wide, round shape. Fat Man was an implosion type of nuclear weapon with a solid plutonium core. The first of that type to be detonated was the Gadget in the Trinity nuclear test less than a month earlier on the 16th of July at the Alamo Border Bombing and Gunnery Range in New Mexico. Two more were detonated during Operation Crossroads nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll in 1946, and some 120 were produced between 1947 and 1949. When it was surpassed by the Mark IV nuclear bomb. The Fat Man was retired in 1950. Early decisions. Robert Oppenheimer held conferences in Chicago in June 1942 prior to the Army taking over wartime atomic research, and in Berkeley, California, in July, at which various engineers and physicists discussed nuclear bomb design issues. They chose a gun-type design in which two subcritical masses would be brought together by firing a bullet into a target. 1. Richard C. Tolman suggested an implosion-type nuclear weapon, but the proposal attracted little interest. 2. The feasibility of a plutonium bomb was questioned in 1942. Wallace Akers, the director of the British Tube Alloys Project, told James Bryant Conant on the 14th of November that James Chadwick had concluded that plutonium might not be a practical fissionable material for weapons because of impurities. 3. Conant consulted Ernest Lawrence and Arthur Compton, who acknowledged that their scientists at Berkeley and Chicago, respectively, knew about the problem, but they could offer no ready solution. Conant informed Manhattan Project Director Brigadier General Leslie R. Groves Jr., who in turn assembled a special committee consisting of Lawrence, Compton, Oppenheimer, and Macmillan to examine the issue. The committee concluded that any problems could be overcome simply by requiring higher purity. 4. Oppenheimer reviewed his options in early 1943 and gave priority to the gun-type weapon. 2. But Heck created the E5 group at the Los Alamos laboratory under Seth Niedermeyer to investigate implosion as a hedge against the threat of pre-detonation. Implosion-type bombs were determined to be significantly more efficient in terms of explosive yield per unit mass of fissile material in the bomb, because compressed fissile materials react more rapidly and therefore more completely. Nonetheless, it was decided that the plutonium gun would receive the bulk of the research effort, since it was the project with the least uncertainty involved. It was assumed that the uranium gun-type bomb could be easily adapted from 5. Naming. The gun-type and implosion-type designs were codenamed Thin Man and Fat Man, respectively. These code names were created by Robert Server, a former student of Oppenheimer's who worked on the Manhattan Project. He chose them based on their design shapes. The Thin Man was a very long device, and the name came from the Dashiell Hammett detective novel The Thin Man and series of movies. The Fat Man was round and fat and was named after Sidney Greenstreet's character in Hammett's The Maltese Falcon. Little Boy came last as a variation of Thin Man. 6. The Little Boy uranium gun-type design came later and was named only to contrast with the Thin Man. 6. Los Alamos's Thin Man and Fat Man code names were adopted by the United States Army Air Forces, USAF. A cover story was devised that Silver Plate was about modifying a Pullman car for use by President Franklin Roosevelt, Thin Man, and United Kingdom Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Fat Man, on a secret tour of the United States. 7. Air Forces personnel used the code names over the phone to make it sound as though they were modifying a plane for Roosevelt and Churchill. 8. Development. Niedermeyer discarded Server and Tolman's initial concept of implosion as assembling a series of pieces in favor of one in which a hollow sphere was imploded by an explosive shell. He was assisted in this work by Hugh Bradner, Charles Critchfield, and John Streb. L.T.E. Thomson was brought in as a consultant, and discussed the problem with Niedermeyer in June 1943. Thomson was skeptical that an implosion could be made sufficiently symmetric. Oppenheimer arranged for Niedermeyer and Edwin Macmillan to visit the National Defense Research Committee's Explosives Research Laboratory near the laboratories of the Bureau of Mines in Brewsterton, Pennsylvania, a Pittsburgh suburb, where they spoke to George Kosciuszko and his team. But Niedermeyer's efforts in July and August at imploding tubes to produce cylinders tended to produce objects that resembled rocks. Niedermeyer was the only person who believed a hot implosion was practical, and only his enthusiasm kept the project alive. 9. Oppenheimer brought John von Neumann to Los Alamos in September 1943 to take a fresh look at implosion. After reviewing Niedermeyer's studies, and discussing the matter with Edward Teller, von Neumann suggested the use of high explosives in shaped charges to implode a sphere, which he showed could not only result in a faster assembly of fissile material than was possible with the gun method, but greatly reduce the amount of material required, because of the resulting higher density. 10. The idea that under such pressures, The plutonium metal itself would be compressed came from Teller, whose knowledge of how dense metals behaved under heavy pressure was influenced by his pre-war theoretical studies of Thelia's core with George Gamow. 11. The prospect of more efficient nuclear weapons impressed. Fat Man replica. Replica mock-up of a Fat Man displayed in the National Museum of United States Air Force. Beside Boxcar B-29 that dropped the original device, black liquid asphalt sealant was sprayed over the original bomb casing's seams, simulated on the mock-up. Oppenheimer, Teller, and Hans Bethe, but they decided that an expert on explosives would be required. Kistiakowski's name was immediately suggested, and Kistiakowski was brought into the project as a consultant in October 1943. 10. The implosion project remained a backup until April 1944, when experiments by Emilio G. Segre and his P5 group at Los Alamos on the newly reactor-produced plutonium from the X-10 graphite reactor at Oak Ridge and the B reactor at the Hanford site showed that it contained impurities in the form of the isotope plutonium-240. This has a far higher spontaneous fission rate and radioactivity than plutonium-239. The cyclotron-produced isotopes on which the original measurements had been made held much lower traces of plutonium-240. Its inclusion in reactor-bred plutonium appeared unavoidable. This meant that the spontaneous fission rate of the reactor plutonium was so high that it would be highly likely that it would pre-detonate and blow itself apart during the initial formation of a critical mass. 12. The distance required to accelerate the plutonium to speeds where pre-detonation would be less likely would need a gun barrel too long for any existing or planned bomber. The only way to use plutonium in a workable bomb was therefore implosion. 13. Small-scale slow-motion cutaway off-shaped charge implosion device. The impracticability of a gun-type bomb using plutonium was agreed at a meeting in Los Alamos on the 17th of July, 1944. All gun-type work in the Manhattan Project was redirected towards the Little Boy, enriched uranium gun design, and the Los Alamos laboratory was reorganized, with almost all of the research focused on the problems of implosion for the Fat Man bomb. 13. The idea of using shaped charges as three-dimensional explosive lenses came from James Bell Tuck, and was developed by von Neumann. 14. A key component needed for the success of the bomb was for there to be absolute precision in all of the plates moving inward at the same time. 15. To overcome the difficulty of synchronizing multiple detonations, Luis Alvarez and Lawrence Johnston invented exploding bridge wire detonators to replace the less precise Primacord detonation system. 14. Robert Christie is credited with doing the calculations that showed how a solid subcritical sphere of plutonium could be compressed to a critical state, greatly simplifying the task, since earlier efforts had attempted the more difficult compression of the hollow spherical shell. 16. After Christie's report, the solid plutonium core weapon was referred to as Christie Gadget. 17. The task of the metallurgists was to determine how to cast plutonium into a sphere. The difficulties became apparent when attempts to measure the density of plutonium gave inconsistent results. At first, contamination was believed to be the cause, but it was soon determined that there were multiple allotropes of plutonium. 18. The brittle alpha phase that exists at room temperature changes to the plastic beta phase at higher temperatures. Attention then shifted to the even more malleable phase that normally exists in the 300-450 degrees Celsius, 570-840 degrees Fahrenheit range. It was found that this was stable at room temperature when alloyed with aluminum, but aluminum emits neutrons when bombarded with alpha particles, which would exacerbate its pre-ignition problem. The metallurgists then hit upon a plutonium-gallium alloy, which stabilized the phase and could be hot-pressed into the desired shape. They found it easier to cast hemispheres than spheres. The core consisted of two hemispheres with a ring with a triangular cross-section between them to keep them aligned and prevent jets forming. As plutonium was found to corrode readily, the sphere was coated with nickel-1920, a pumpkin bomb, Fat Man test unit, being raised from the pit into the bomb bay of AB-29 for bombing practice during the weeks before the attack on Nagasaki. The size of the bomb was constrained by the available aircraft which were investigated for suitability.